It was Christmas Eve in New York City. The cab made its way slowly down Fifth Avenue. It was nearly 5 o'clock. The traffic was heavy and the sidewalks were jammed with last-minute Christmas shoppers and tourists anxious to glimpse the elaborately trimmed store windows and the fabled Rockefeller Center Christmas tree. Catherine Dornan sat bolt upright in the back of the cab, her arms around the shoulders of her two small sons. By the rigidity she felt in their bodies, she knew her mother had been right. 10-year-old Michael's surliness and 7-year-old Brian's silence were sure signs that both boys were intensely worried about their dad. They had come to New York City from Omaha for Tom Dornan's surgery. Earlier that afternoon, she had called her mother from the hospital, still sobbing despite the fact that Spence Crawley, her husband's best friend and doctor, assured her that Tom had come through the operation better than expected. Spencer had even suggested that the boys visit their father at 7 o'clock that night. Catherine's mother had spoken to her firmly. "You've got to pull yourself together. The boys are upset and you're not helping. I think it would be good to divert them for a little while. Take them down to Rockefeller Center to see the tree, then to dinner. Seeing you so worried has practically convinced them that Tom will die." Catherine knew her mother was right. But this isn't supposed to be happening, she thought. Lean, athletic 38-year-old men don't collapse while making their hospital rounds. And Dr. Tom Dornan always joked that pediatricians had birthright immunization to all the viruses and germs that arrived with their patients. But Tom didn't have immunization from the leukemia that necessitated immediate removal of his grossly enlarged spleen. At the hospital they told her that he must have been ignoring warning signs for months. And I was too stupid to notice, Catherine thought as she tried to keep her lip from quivering. The cab pulled over to the curb. Catherine pulled out her wallet. Michael watched as his mother peeled a $5 bill from the large wad of cash. "How come you have so much money, Mom?" "When Dad was admitted to the hospital yesterday, they made me take everything he had in his billfold." She followed Michael out onto the sidewalk and held the door open for Brian. They were in front of Saks, near the corner of 49th Street and Fifth Avenue. Orderly lines of spectators were patiently waiting to get a close-up look at the Christmas window display. Catherine steered her sons to the back of the line. "Let's see the windows, then we'll go across the street and get a better look at the tree." Brian sighed heavily. This was some Christmas. He hated standing in line. For anything. He could hardly wait to see his dad, to give him the present his grandmother had said would make him well. When it was finally their turn to get up close to the windows, Brian moved quickly, barely noticing the scenes of whirling snowflakes and dolls and elves and animals dancing and singing. He was glad when they finally were off the line. Then, as they started to make their way to the corner to cross the avenue, he saw that a guy with a violin was about to start playing, and people were gathering around him. The air suddenly was filled with the sound of silent night, and people began singing. Catherine turned back from the curb. "Wait, boys. Let's listen for a few minutes." Brian could hear the catch in her throat and knew that she was trying not to cry. He'd hardly ever seen Mom cry until 10 days ago, when someone phoned from the hospital and said Dad was real sick. Callie Hunter walked slowly down Fifth Avenue. It was nearly 5:30, and she was surrounded by crowds of last-minute shoppers, their arms filled with packages. There was a time when she might have shared their excitement, but today all she felt was achingly tired. Work had been so difficult. During the Christmas holidays, people wanted to be home, so most of the patients in the hospital had been either depressed or difficult. Their bleak expressions reminded her vividly of her own depression over the last 2 Christmases, both of them spent in the Bedford Correctional Facility for women. She passed St. Patrick's Cathedral, hesitating only a moment as a memory came back to her of her grandmother taking her and her brother Jimmy there to see the creche. But that was 20 years ago. She had been 10, and he 6. She wished she could go back to that time, change things, keep the bad things from happening, keep Jimmy from becoming what he was now. Even to think her brother's name was enough to send waves of fear coursing through her body. Dear God, make him leave me alone, she prayed. Early this morning, with Gigi clinging to her, she had answered the angry pounding on her door to find Detective Shore and another officer who said he was Detective Levy standing in the dingy hallway of her apartment building on East 10th Street and Avenue B. "Callie, you covering for your brother again?" The detective's question was Callie's first indication that Jimmy Sidens had escaped from Rikers Island prison. Shore glared at her. "This time the charge is attempted murder of a prison guard. Your brother shot him and took his uniform. The officer is in critical condition, so you'll spend a lot more than 15 months in jail if you help Jimmy again. I don't have to remind you that you're still on probation. This time they'll throw the book at you." She'd spoken quietly. "I've never forgiven myself for helping Jimmy last time, and I didn't know what he'd done before." Their eyes shifted past her, searching the room behind her for signs of his presence. "Look around. He isn't here. And if you want to put a tap on my phone, do that too. I want you to hear me tell Jimmy to turn himself in, because that's all I'd have to say to him." "But surely Jimmy won't find me," Callie prayed as she threaded her way through the crowd of shoppers and sightseers. "Not this time." After she had served her prison sentence, she reclaimed Gigi from the foster home. The social worker had located the tiny apartment on East 10th Street and gotten her the job as a nurse's aide at St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital. This would be her first Christmas with Gigi in 2 years. If only she had been able to afford a few decent presents for her, she thought. A 4-year-old kid should have her own new doll's carriage, not the battered hand-me-down Callie'd been forced to get for her. The coverlet and pillow she had bought wouldn't hide the shabbiness of the carriage. But maybe she could find the guy who was selling dolls on the street around here last week. They were only $8, and she remembered that there was even one that looked like Gigi. She hadn't had enough money with her that day, but the guy had said he'd be near Saks on Christmas Eve, so she had to find him. Oh, God, she prayed, let them arrest Jimmy before he hurts anyone else. There's something wrong with him. There always has been. Ahead of her, people were singing Silent Night. As she got closer, she realized that they weren't carolers, just a crowd around a street violinist who was playing Christmas tunes. Holy Infant, so tender and mild. Brian did not join in the singing, even though Silent Night was his favorite, and at home in Omaha he was a member of his church's children's choir. He wished he were there now and not New York. He jammed his hands in the pockets of his jacket. He didn't want to listen to the guy playing the violin, and he didn't feel like standing here. They were wasting time. He wanted to get to the hospital and watch Mom give Dad the big St. Christopher medal that had saved Grandpa's life when he was a soldier in World War II. Grandpa had worn it all through the war, and it even had a dent in it where a bullet had hit it. Gran had asked Mom to give it to Dad to wear, and Mom had almost laughed. Oh, Mother, Christopher was only a myth. He's not considered a saint anymore, and the only people he helped were the ones who sold the medals everybody used to stick on their dashboards. But Gran had told her, Catherine, your father believed it helped him get through some terrible battles, and that is all that matters. He believed, and so do I. Please give it to Tom and have faith. Brian felt impatient with his mother. If Gran believed that Dad was going to get better if he got the medal, then his mom had to give it to him. He was positive Gran was right. Sleep in heavenly peace. The violin stopped playing, and a woman who had been leading the singing held out a basket. Brian watched as people began to drop coins and dollar bills into it. Once again, his mother pulled her wallet out and extracted 2 $1 bills. "Michael, Brian, here. Put these in the basket." Michael grabbed his dollar and tried to push his way through the crowd. Brian started to follow him. Then he noticed that his mother's wallet hadn't gone all the way down into her shoulder bag when she had put it back. As he watched, he saw the wallet fall to the ground. Brian turned back to retrieve it, but before he could pick it up, a hand reached down and grabbed it. He saw that the hand belonged to a thin woman with a dark raincoat and a long ponytail. "Mom?" But everyone was singing again, and Catherine didn't turn her head. The woman who had taken the wallet began to slip through the crowd. Instinctively, Brian began to follow her, afraid to lose sight of her. He turned back to call out to his mother again, but she was singing along now, too. For an instant, Brian hesitated as he glanced over his shoulder at his mother. Should he run back and get her? But he thought again about the medal that would make his father better. It was in the wallet, and he couldn't let it get stolen. The woman was already turning the corner. He raced to catch up with her. "Why'd I pick up the wallet?" Callie thought frantically. "You know it probably belonged to that woman with the little boys. It was on the ground next to her." The wallet felt like a hot brick in her pocket. In her mind, Callie replayed the moment when she first noticed the slim young woman in the rose-colored all-weather coat. She could see the coat was fur-lined from the turned-back sleeves. It obviously was expensive, as were the woman's shoulder bag and boots. The dark hair that came to the collar of her coat was shiny. She didn't look like she could have a care in the world. Callie had thought, "I wished I looked like that. She's about my age and my size, and we have almost the same color hair. Well, maybe by next year I can afford pretty clothes for Gigi and me." Then, as she passed the woman, she'd felt her foot kick something, and she looked down and seen the wallet lying there. "Why didn't I just ask if it was hers?" Callie agonized. But in that instant, she'd remembered how years ago her grandmother had come home one day, embarrassed and upset. She had found a wallet on the street and opened it and saw the name and address of the owner. She'd walked several blocks to return it, even though her arthritis was so bad that every step was painful. The woman who owned it had looked through it and said that a $20 bill was missing. Grandmother had been terribly upset. She felt that the woman had practically accused her of being a thief. That memory had flooded Callie the minute she touched the wallet. Suppose it did belong to the lady in the rose coat, and she thought Callie had picked her pocket or taken money out of it. Suppose a policeman was called. They'd find out she was on probation. They wouldn't believe her any more than they'd believed her when she lent Jimmy money and her car because he'd told her if he didn't get out of town right away, a guy in another street gang was going to kill him. Oh, God, why didn't I just leave the wallet there? Callie tried to reassure herself that if she hadn't picked it up, it would have just lain there and someone else would have taken it. She considered tossing it in the nearest mailbox. She couldn't risk that. There were too many undercover cops around Midtown during the holidays. Suppose one of them saw her and asked what she was doing. No, she'd get home right away. Ika Banks, who minded Gigi along with her own grandchildren after the daycare center closed, would be bringing her home. It was getting late. I'll put it in an envelope, addressed to whosever name is in it, and drop it in the mailbox later, Callie decided. That's all I can do. Callie reached Grand Central Station. It was mobbed with people rushing in all directions, hurrying home for Christmas. She shouldered her way across the main terminal, finally making it down the steps to the Lexington Avenue subway. As she dropped a token in the slot and hurried for the train, she was unaware of the small boy who had slipped under a turnstile and was dogging her footsteps. The familiar words, "God rest you, merry gentlemen, let nothing you dismay," seemed to taunt Catherine, reminding her of the forces that threatened the happily complacent life she had assumed would be hers forever. She could not escape the fear that her husband was not going to live, and the thought of life without him was almost paralyzing. Michael returned from dropping the dollar in the singer's basket. "Mom, where's Brian?" Startled from her thoughts, Catherine looked around for her son. "Didn't he go with you to the singer?" "No, he probably kept the dollar instead. He's a dork." "Michael, stop it." Catherine looked around, suddenly alarmed. "Brian? Brian?" The carol was over, the crowd dispersing. A few people turned and looked at her curiously. "A little boy. He's wearing a dark blue ski jacket and a red cap. Did anyone see where he went?" She watched as head shook, as eyes looked around, wanting but unable to help. Catherine knew that something was terribly wrong. She felt the tears that now came so easily rising behind her eyes. She fumbled in her bag for a handkerchief and realized something was missing, the familiar bulk of her wallet. "Oh my God, my wallet's gone." Michael lost his surly look and suddenly became a scared 10-year-old. Catherine felt that her legs were turning to rubber. "Call the police! My little boy is missing!" Brian was having trouble keeping up with the woman who had his mom's wallet. The subway car was so crowded he could hardly get in. The woman was standing, hanging onto a bar that ran over the seats along the side. Brian stood near her, his eyes fixed on her ponytail and dark raincoat. They went only one long stop, then she pushed her way to the opening doors. So many people were in Brian's way that he almost didn't get out of the subway car in time, and then had to hurry to catch up with her. They emerged on a busy corner. Buses raced past in both directions, rushing to get across the wide street before the light turned red. This street sign said 14th. Brian wished a cop would come along so he could ask for help, but he didn't see one anywhere. He knew what he was going to do anyway. He would follow the lady to where she lived. He still had the dollar his mother had given him. He would get change and call his grandmother, and she'd send a cop who would get his mom's wallet back. It's a good plan, he thought to himself. In fact, he was sure of it. He had to get the wallet and the medal that was inside. The street they were on now wasn't bright for the first time. Brian felt scared. Some places were boarded up, and there was a lot of writing on the buildings, and some of the street lights were broken. He was out of breath, trying to keep up with the lady. How far was she going, he wondered. 2 blocks later, he had his answer. She stopped at the entrance to an old building, stuck her key in the door, and went inside. Brian raced to catch the door before it closed behind her. The hall was dark and dirty. The smell of stale food hung in the air. Ahead of him, he could hear footsteps going up the stairs. Gulping to swallow his fear and trying not to make noise, Brian slowly began to climb to the first landing. He would see where the lady went, then he would get out of there and find a telephone. Maybe instead of calling Gran, he would dial 911. His mom had taught him that that was what he should do when he really needed help, which, so far, he didn't. Catherine and Michael were sitting in a squad car parked in front of Saks, near the spot where the violinist had been playing. The police officer in charge, Manuel Ortiz, spoke to them soothingly. "All right, Mrs. Dornan. Describe your son to me." "He's 7 and small for his age." "What color hair?" Michael clutched his mother's hand reassuringly as he answered. "Like mine, kind of reddish. His eyes are blue. He's got freckles, and one of his front teeth is missing. He has the same kind of pants I'm wearing, and his jacket is like mine, except it's blue and mine's green. He's skinny." "You're a real help, son. Now, ma'am, you say your wallet is missing. Do you think you might have dropped it, or it could have been a pickpocket?" "I don't know. I gave the boys money for the violinist. I probably didn't push it down far enough in my purse. It was quite bulky and might have just fallen out." "Ma'am, do you want to call your husband?" "My husband is in Sloan Kettering Hospital. He's very ill. In fact, he's expecting us. He'll be wondering where we are." Manuel Ortiz had been a policeman only a year, but already he had come in contact with grief and despair many times. He saw both in the eyes of this young woman. She had a husband who was very sick, now a missing kid. "Mrs. Dornan, I'm going to get Brian's description out right now. In 3 minutes, every cop in Manhattan is going to be on the lookout for him. Why don't you leave Michael with us? We'll stay here in case Brian tries to make his way back. I'll get another car to take you up to the hospital and wait for you." "Officer, you'll stay right here in case Brian comes back?" "Absolutely." "Michael, will you keep your eyes peeled for Brian?" "Sure, Mom. I'll watch out for the dork." "Don't call him." Then Catherine saw the look on her son's face. "He's trying to get a rise out of me," she thought. "He's trying to convince me that Brian is fine, that he'll be fine." She put her arms around Michael and felt his small, gruff embrace return. Jimmy Sidens cursed silently as he walked through the oval near Avenue B in the Stuyvesant Town apartment complex. The uniform he had stripped from the prison guard gave him a respectable look, but it was much too dangerous to wear on the street. He'd managed to lift a filthy overcoat and knit cap from a homeless guy's shopping cart. They helped some, but he had to find something else to wear, something decent. He also needed a car, nothing fancy, but one that wouldn't be missed until morning. So far, he hadn't found the right one. He was cold and getting hungry. 10 hours in the car, he told himself. Then I'll be in Canada and Paige will meet me there and we'll disappear again. She was the first real girlfriend he'd ever had, and she'd been a big help to him in Detroit. He knew he never would have been caught last summer if he had cased that gas station in Detroit better. He should have known enough to check the John outside the office instead of letting himself be surprised by an off-duty cop who stepped out of it while he was holding a gun on the attendant. The next day he was on his way back to New York to face trial for killing a cop. An older couple passed him and threw a smile in his direction. Jimmy responded with a courteous nod. He paid close attention when he heard the woman speak. "Ed, I can't believe you didn't put the presents for the children in the trunk. Who leaves anything inside in a car overnight in this day and age?" Jimmy went around the corner and then stepped into the deep shadows on the grass as he returned to watch the couple stop in front of a dark-colored Toyota. The man opened the door. From the back seat he took a small rocking horse and handed it to the woman, then scooped up 6 brightly wrapped packages. With her help, he transferred everything to the trunk, relocked the car, and got back on the sidewalk. Jimmy listened carefully as the woman continued. "I can't wait to see Bobby's face tomorrow when he opens everything. Ed, will the phone be all right in the glove compartment?" "Sure, it's a waste of money as far as I'm concerned." Jimmy watched as they turned the corner and disappeared. As he straightened up, he cursed under his breath when he saw the car's bumper sticker. It read, "We're spending our grandchildren's inheritance." It was too damn noticeable. He waited 10 minutes before he walked to the car. As he pulled off most of the distinctive sticker, a few snowflakes swirled around him. 2 minutes later, he was driving out of the complex. It was 5:15. He was headed to Callie's apartment on 10th and B. He knew she'd be surprised to see him, and none too happy. She probably thought he couldn't find her. Why would she suppose that he didn't have a way to keep track of her from Rikers Island? He'd have to be careful. He was sure the cops would be watching for him around Callie's building, but he had that figured out too. He used to hang around this neighborhood and knew how to get across roofs from the other end of the block and into the building. A couple of times he'd even pulled a job there when he was a kid. Knowing Callie, he was sure she still kept some of Frank's clothes in the closet. She'd been crazy about him, probably still had pictures of him all over the place. You'd never think her husband had died before Gigi was even born. And knowing Callie, he figured she'd have at least a few bucks that would get him through the tolls. He'd find a way to keep her mouth shut until he was safely in Canada with Paige. Paige. An image of her floated through his mind. Luscious, blonde, only 22, crazy about him. She'd arranged everything, gotten the gun smuggled into him. She'd never let him down or turn her back on him. Not like his big sister who hadn't come to see him once in Rikers. He hadn't even heard from her. Jimmy's smile was unpleasant. "You never tried to help me while I was rotting in Rikers Island," he thought. "But once again, Callie, you're going to help me get away, like it or not." 15 minutes later, Jimmy had picked the flimsy lock of Callie's apartment and was inside. Some dump, he thought, as he took in the cracks in the ceiling and the worn linoleum in the tiny entranceway. But neat, Callie was always neat. A Christmas tree in the corner of what passed for a living room had a couple of small, brightly wrapped packages under it. Jimmy shrugged and went into the bedroom, where he ransacked the closet to find the clothes he knew would be there. After changing, he went through the place looking for money, but found none. He sat on the couch, his eyes riveted on the front door, his nerves jangling. "Come on, Callie," he thought. "Where the hell are you?" At 10 to 6, he heard the key inserted in the lock. He jumped up and in 3 long strides was in the entryway, flattened against the wall. He waited until Callie stepped in and closed the door behind her, then put his hand over her mouth. "Don't scream." He muffled her terrified moan with his palm. "Where's Gigi? Why isn't she with you?" He released his grip long enough to let her answer. "She's at the babysitter's." "How much money have you got?" "Here, take my pocketbook." Callie held it out to him, praying that he would not think to look through her coat pockets. Oh, God, she thought, make him go away. "Callie, I'm going to let go of you. Don't try anything or Gigi won't have a mommy waiting for her. You understand that?" "Yes. Callie waited until he released his grip on her, then slowly turned to face him. She hadn't seen her brother in 3 years. He looks about the same, she thought, except his eyes held no trace of the occasional warmth that at one time made her hope there was a possibility he might someday straighten out. There was nothing left of the frightened 6-year-old who had clung to her when their parents dumped them with Grandma and disappeared from their lives. He opened her billfold. $18, is that all?" "Jimmy, I don't get paid till the day after tomorrow. Please just take it and get out of here." There's half a tank of gas in the car, Jimmy thought. There's money here for another half tank in the tolls. I might just be able to make Canada. He'd have to shut Callie up, of course, but that should be easy enough. He would just warn her that if she put the cops onto him and he got caught, he'd swear that she was the one who arranged for the smuggled gun that he'd used on the guard. Suddenly, a sound from outside made him whirl around. With a menacing gesture to Callie, he noiselessly turned the knob and opened the door just in time to see a small boy darting for the staircase. In one quick movement, Jimmy swooped up the child, covered his mouth, and pulled him inside. As he flung the door closed, he roughly released the boy. "Callie, who is this?" "I don't know who he is. I never seen him before." Brian was so scared he could hardly talk, but he wasn't so scared that he couldn't see that the man and woman were mad at each other. Maybe the man would help him get his mother's wallet back, he thought. He pointed to Callie. "She has my mom's wallet. I saw her pick it up, and I followed her because I have to get it back." A wide grin appeared on Jimmy's face. "Well, now, that's good news." The lobby of Sloan Kettering Hospital was decorated for the holiday season. A Christmas tree was in the center, and garlands of evergreens and poinsettias were banked against the reception desk. Apprehensively, Catherine approached the nurse's station. There she encountered Dr. Spence Crawley. Her mouth went dry. Why was Spence here now? Could something be wrong? He spotted her and smiled. Oh, God, he wouldn't smile if something had happened to Tom. Spence walked quickly around the desk and came to her. "Catherine, if you could see the look on your face. Tom's doing fine. He's pretty groggy, of course, but the vital signs are good." Catherine looked up at him, wanting to believe the words she heard, wanting to trust the sincerity she saw in the brown eyes behind rimless glasses. Firmly, he took her arm and ushered her into the cubicle behind the nurse's station. "Catherine, I don't want to bully you, but you have to understand that Tom has a good chance of beating this thing. A very good chance. I have patients who've led useful, full lives with leukemia. When he recuperates fully from the operation, he can go back to work, and I swear to you that is going to happen. But there is a problem. This afternoon, when you saw Tom in ICU, you were pretty upset. Yes, I couldn't help myself. She had tried not to cry, but couldn't stop. She'd been so worried, and knowing that he had made it through the operation was such a relief that she couldn't contain her grief. Catherine, I just spoke with Tom. He asked me to level with him. From your behavior, he believes I told you it was hopeless. Now he's starting not to trust me. He's beginning to wonder if maybe I'm hiding something, that maybe things are worse than I'm telling him. Well, Catherine, that is simply not so, and your job is to convince him that you have every expectation that you two will have a long life together. He mustn't get it into his head that he has a very limited time, not only because that would be harmful to him, but equally important because I don't believe that's true. In order to get well, Tom needs faith in his chances to get better, and a great deal of that has to come from you. Now go in there with a light step and a happy face. You can do it. Catherine forced a smile. Like this? Spence nodded. Much better. Now remember, keep that smile going. You're gorgeous when you smile. Catherine nodded and started down the hall. At room 530, she opened the door quietly. Tom was asleep. An IV was dripping fluid into his arm. Oxygen tubes were in his nostrils. His skin was as white as the pillowcase. His lips were ashen. Catherine studied her husband's face, scrutinizing every detail. The high forehead framed by the reddish-brown hair that was exactly the color of Brian's. The thick eyebrows that always looked a bit unruly. The well-shaped nose and the lips that were usually parted in a smile. She thought of his eyes, more blue than gray, and the warm understanding they conveyed. He gives confidence to his patients, she thought. Oh, Tom, I want to tell you that our little boy is missing. I want you to be well and with me looking for him. Tom Dornan opened his eyes. Hi, love. She bent over and kissed him. Hi yourself. You're doing great. You really are, you know. She could see he did not believe her. Not yet, she thought determinedly. Kath, I thought you were bringing the kids tonight. She realized that with Tom it was not possible to utter Brian's name without breaking down. I was afraid they'd be hanging all over you. I thought it was a good idea to have them wait until tomorrow. He nodded drowsily. Your mother phoned. She said she was sending a special present with you and that you would give it to me. What is it? Not without the boys. They want to be the ones to give it to you. Okay. But be sure to bring them in the morning. I want to see them. And then he was asleep again. With a last glance at her husband, she hurried from the room, raced through the hospital into the waiting police car. The cop answered her unspoken question. No word so far, Mrs. Dornan. Jimmy Siden's expression turned ugly as he faced his sister. Don't make me take the wallet from you. Callie reached into her coat pocket and took out the handsome Moroccan leather wallet. Silently, she handed it to her brother. That wallet belongs to my mother. The man gave Brian a glance that made him shiver. Jimmy Sidens opened the wallet, pulled out a thick wad of bills, and began counting. My. $688, not bad. In fact, it'll do just fine. He stuffed the money in the pocket of the suede jacket he had taken from the bedroom closet and began to dig through the wallet. Brian watched as a deep compartment revealed the metal. Jimmy Sidens lifted it out and held it up. St. Christopher! I haven't been inside a church in years, but even I know they kicked him out long ago. And when I think of all the stories they used to tell us about how he carried the Christ child on his shoulders across the stream or the river or whatever it was. Disdainfully, he let the metal clatter to the floor. Brian swooped to retrieve it, then slipped it around his neck. "My grandpa carried it all through the war and came home safe. It's going to make my dad get better. I don't care about the wallet. You can have it. This is what I really wanted. I'm going now." He had the door open before Siddons reached him and shoved him roughly to the floor. "You and St. Christopher are staying right here with me." Brian gasped as his forehead slammed into the cracked linoleum. He sat up slowly, rubbing his head. He felt like the room was spinning, but he could hear the woman pleading with the man. "Jimmy, don't hurt him. Please, just take the money and go." Brian wrapped his arms around his legs, trying not to cry. He shouldn't have followed the lady. He knew that now. This man was bad. He felt the metal dangling against his chest and closed his fist around it. "Please, get me back to Mom," he prayed silently, "so I can bring you to Dad." Jimmy's mind was racing, assessing the situation. He looked at the phone on the table next to the couch. Then, grinning, he reached for the cellular phone he had taken from the glove compartment of the stolen car. He also took out a gun and pointed it at Callie. "The cops probably have your phone tapped. So I'm going to dial your number and tell you I'm turning myself in. All you have to do is act nice and nervous, just like you are now. Make a mistake and you and this kid are dead." He looked down at Brian. "One peep out of you and I will—" Brian felt the unspoken threat and nodded to show he understood. As soon as Jimmy Siddons finished dialing, Callie's phone rang. "Hello?" "Callie, it's Jimmy. Listen, I'm in trouble. You probably know by now. I'm sorry I tried to get away. I hope that guard will be all right. I'm broke and I'm scared. Please, call Gil Weinstein. He's the public defender assigned to me. Tell him I'll meet him at St. Patrick's Cathedral when midnight mass is over. Tell him I want to turn myself in and I want him to be there with me. His home number is 555-0267. Callie, I'm sorry I messed up everything so badly." Jimmy pressed the disconnect on the cellular phone and watched as Callie hung up as well. "Okay, now phone Weinstein and give him the same story. If the cops are listening, they must be jumping up and down right now." Jimmy shoved the gun to her head. "Make the call." Callie did not need to be told to make it quick. The moment Gil Weinstein was on the phone, she delivered the message in a quivering voice. The public defender agreed to the meeting. When she'd hung up, Jimmy smiled. "You make a great accomplice, big sister." He turned from Callie and looked down at Brian. "What's your name, kid?" "Brian." "Come on, Brian, we're getting out of here." "Jimmy, leave him alone, please. Leave him here with me." "No way. There's always the chance you'd go running to the cops, even though the minute they talk to that kid, you're in big trouble yourself. After all, you did steal his mama's wallet. No, the kid comes with me. No one is looking for a guy with his little boy, are they? I'll let him go tomorrow morning when I get to where I'm headed, and after that you can tell them anything you like about me. The kid'll even back you up, won't you, Sonny?" Trembling, Brian shrank against Callie. She thrust him behind her. "Jimmy, leave him here, please." She knew that Jimmy would stop at nothing to get away, not at killing her, not at killing the boy. Jimmy Siddons' mouth twisted in anger. He grabbed her arm and yanked her toward him, roughly twisting her arm behind her. She screamed as she lost her grip on Brian and slipped to the floor. With eyes that denied any history of affection between them, Jimmy stood over his sister, again holding the gun to her head. "If you don't do what I tell you, you'll get more of that and worse. They won't take me alive. Not you, not anybody else is going to send me to the death chamber. Besides, I got a girlfriend waiting for me, so you just keep your mouth shut. I'll even make a deal. You don't say nothing, and I'll let the kid live. But if the cops try to close in on me, he gets a bullet to the head. It's as simple as that. Got it?" The unmarked van across the street from Callie's apartment building was the lookout post for the NYPD detectives watching for any sign of Jimmy Siddons. Jack Shore, the detective who had visited Callie that morning, pulled off his earphones, swore silently, and turned to his partner. "What do you think, Mort?" "No, wait a minute. I'll tell you what I think. It's a trick. He's trying to buy time to get as far away from New York as possible while we take up the collection at St. Pat's looking for him." Mort Levy, 20 years younger than Shore and less cynical, rubbed his chin, always a sign that he was deep in thought. Well, if it's a trick, I don't think the sister is a willing accomplice. You don't need a meter to hear the stress level in her voice. You've scared her to death, Jack. She thinks you'd do anything to see her back behind bars. For God's sake, can't you look at her as a human being? She got a 4-year-old child, her husband is dead, and she got the book thrown at her when she made the mistake of helping the brother she practically raised. Shore shook his head. Listen, Mort, you were at Bill Grasso's funeral. If Callie Hunter had come clean with us and told us that she'd given that rat brother of hers money and the keys to her car, Grasso would have known what he was up against when he stopped Sidens for running a light. I still believe that Callie had bought Jimmy's story about trying to get away because he'd been in a gang fight and the other gang was after him. I don't think she knew that he'd wounded a clerk in a liquor store. Up till then, he hadn't been in really serious trouble. You mean he'd gotten away with it till then? Too bad that judge couldn't put Callie away as an accessory to murder instead of just aiding a fugitive. Today, she's a free woman, and tonight, Bill Grasso's family is trimming the tree without him. Callie sat on the worn velour sofa, her hands clasped around her knees, her head bent, her eyes closed. Her entire body was trembling. She was beyond tears, beyond fatigue. Dear God, what should I do? If anything happened to Brian, she would be responsible. She had picked up his mother's wallet, something she'd known at the time she shouldn't have done. Yet she did, and that's why he'd followed her. The boy's face loomed in Callie's mind. The reddish-brown hair that fell forward on his forehead, the large, intelligent blue eyes, the spatter of freckles on his cheeks and nose. Would Jimmy let the boy go when he got to his destination? How could he, she reasoned. But if I tell the cops, for certain Brian doesn't have a chance. If I don't say anything now, and Jimmy does let him go, then I can honestly say that I didn't tell because he threatened to kill Brian, and I knew Jimmy meant it. Callie shivered, aware that she still had her coat on, and that the apartment was dark except for the entryway light. She took off the coat, went into the bedroom, and opened the closet door. She gasped when she saw the filthy overcoat and the guard's bloodied uniform crumpled on the floor. Frantically, Callie wrapped the uniform inside the overcoat. Suppose the cops came in with a search warrant. They'd never believe her that Jimmy broke into her place. They'd be sure she gave him clothes. She'd go back to prison. And she'd lose Gigi for good. She looked around the closet, wildly searching for a solution. The storage box on the overhead shelf. In it she kept whatever summer clothes she and Gigi had. She yanked the box down, opened it, pulled out the contents, and threw them on the shelf. She folded the uniform and coat into the box and with frantic fingers wrapped candy cane paper around the box and tied it with a ribbon. Then she carried it into the living room and put it under the tree. She had just completed the task when she heard the downstairs buzzer. Smoothing back her hair, she went to answer it. It was Detective Shore and the other detective who had been with him this morning. Shore spoke. "Playing games again, Callie?" "I hope not." Brian huddled in the passenger seat as Jimmy Sidens drove up the East River Drive. He had never felt so afraid before. He'd been scared when the man made him climb up that fire escape to the roof. Then he'd practically been dragged from one roof to another as they went the length of the block, finally going down through an empty building and onto the street where this car was parked. The man had pushed Brian into the car and snapped on the seatbelt. He warned Brian, "Just remember to call me Daddy if anyone stops us." Brian huddled deeper in the seat. He was scared and hungry. He had to go to the bathroom. His only comfort was the medal that now lay against his chest on the outside of his jacket. It had brought Grandpa home from the war. It was going to make Daddy well, and it was going to get him home safe, too. He was sure of it. Jimmy Sidens glanced briefly at his small hostage. For the first time since he had broken out of the prison, he was beginning to relax. It was still snowing, but if it didn't get any worse than this, it was nothing to worry about. Callie wouldn't call the cops. He was positive of that. She knew him well enough to believe him when he said he would kill the kid if he was stopped. I'm not going to rot in prison for the rest of my life, he thought, and I'm not giving them the chance to pump me full of poison. Either I make it or I don't. But I will. He smiled grimly. He knew there had to be an APB out on him, and they'd be watching all the bridges and tunnels out of New York. But they had no idea where he was heading, and they certainly weren't looking for a father and son traveling in a car that wasn't reported stolen yet. And in 8 or 9 hours he would be across the border and into Canada, where Paige would be waiting. And then he'd deal with the car and this kid with his St. Christopher medal. The awesome power of the New York City Police Department ground methodically into gear as plans were laid to assure that Jimmy Sidens did not slip between their fingers. When Jack Shore and Mort Levy got back to the van, Shore reported to headquarters. "We just were back to Callie Hunter's apartment, sir. She's fully aware of the consequences if she helps her brother in any way. The babysitter dropped off her kid as we were leaving, and my guess is Callie's in for the night." Mort Levy frowned as he listened to his partner's conversation with the deputy police commissioner. There was something about that apartment that was different from the way it had looked this morning, but he couldn't figure out what it was. Jack had asked Callie if she would mind if they looked around again, and she had nodded assent. Certainly no one was hiding in that place. They had opened the door to the bathroom, looked under the beds, poked in the closet. Levy had felt unwilling pity for Callie Hunter's attempts to brighten the dismal apartment. All the walls were painted a bright yellow. Floral pillows were randomly piled on the old couch. The Christmas tree was bravely decorated with tons of tinsel and strings of red and green lights. A few brightly wrapped presents were placed under it. Presents. Mort did not know why this word triggered something in his subconscious. What am I trying to remember about her apartment? What was different? He thought for a moment longer, then shook his head. Forget it, he told himself. He wished Jack hadn't bullied Callie Hunter. It was easy to see that she was terrified of him. He was glad that just before he left Callie's apartment, he had slipped her his card. "If you want to talk to anyone, Mrs. Hunter, here's a number where you can reach me." Michael was sitting in the front seat of the squad car with Officer Ortiz sipping a soda. Catherine squeezed in beside him and smoothed his hair. He looked up at her anxiously. "How's Dad? You didn't tell him about Brian, did you?" "No, of course not. I'm sure we'll find Brian soon, and there was no need to worry him. And he's doing just great. I saw Dr. Crawley, and he's very pleased with Dad's progress." She looked over Michael's head at Officer Ortiz. "It's been almost 2 hours." Ortiz nodded. "Brian's description will keep going out every hour to every cop and car in the area. Mrs. Dornan, Michael and I have been talking. He thinks that maybe Brian took off after someone who he saw take your wallet." "I've been thinking the same thing. It's the only answer that makes sense." Then the import of what the policeman had said hit her. He thinks that if Brian followed whoever took my wallet, he may have confronted that person. Oh, God. No. Mrs. Dornan, if it's all right with you, I think it would be a good idea if we tried to get cooperation from the media. We might be able to get some of the local TV stations to show Brian's picture if you have one. The one I carried is in my wallet. Mom, call Gran. She has a bunch of pictures of us. Like father, like son, Catherine thought. Brian looks like Tom. Michael thinks like him. She closed her eyes against the waves of near panic that washed through her. Images of Brian standing up to a thief flashed in her mind. My little boy, she thought. Would someone hurt my little boy? She felt Michael fishing in her shoulder bag. He pulled out the cellular phone. "I'll call Gran." In her apartment on 87th Street, Barbara Cavanaugh clutched the phone, not wanting to believe what her daughter was telling her. Brian was missing and had been missing for over 2 hours now. Barbara managed to keep her voice calm. "Where are you, dear?" "Michael and I are in a police car at 49th and 5th. That's where we were standing when Brian just suddenly wasn't next to me. I'll be right there. Mom, be sure to bring the most recent pictures you have of Brian. The police want to give them out to the media, and the local radio station is going to have me on in a few minutes to make an appeal. Oh, and Mom, call the nurses' station at the hospital. Tell them to make absolutely sure that Tom isn't allowed to turn on the TV in his room. If he ever found out that Brian was missing, I'll call right away, Catherine, and I'll bring everything I can find. I'm on my way. Callie and her daughter were curled up together on the couch across from the Christmas tree. Wearing a red and white Christmas nightgown with figures of angels carrying candles, Gigi settled onto Callie's lap. Her wide brown eyes and wavy golden-brown hair were legacies from her father, Frank Hunter. The older she gets, the more she looks like him, Callie thought, instinctively holding the child tighter. Mommy, why are you sad? I'm not sad, Gigi. I'm always happy when I'm with you. I'm glad you're home with me, Mommy. You won't leave me again, will you? No. I didn't want to leave you last time, sweetheart. I didn't like visiting you at that place. That place. 15 months in the Bedford Correctional Facility for women. I didn't like being there. Mommy, kids should stay with their mothers. Yeah, I think so too. Mommy, is that big present for me? Gigi pointed to the box that held the uniform and coat Jimmy had discarded. Callie's lips went dry. No, sweetheart, that's a present for Santa Claus. He likes to get something for Christmas, too. Now, come on, it's past your bedtime. Will Christmas come faster if I go to bed now? Uh-huh. Come on, I'll carry you in. When she had tucked the blankets around Gigi, Callie went back to the living room and once again sank down onto the couch. Kids should stay with their mothers. Gigi's words haunted her. Dear God, where had Jimmy taken that little boy? What would he do to him? What should I do? Jimmy was evil. He had no conscience, no pity. Face it, Callie told herself fiercely. He won't hesitate to kill that little boy if it helps his chances to escape. Brian looked out the window as they crossed the George Washington Bridge. He knew Jimmy was going over the Hudson River. He had cousins who lived near the bridge, and last summer he and Michael had visited them. Just thinking about them made Brian want to cry. He wished he could open the window and shout, "I'm here! Come get me, please!" He was so hungry, and he really had to go to the bathroom. He looked up timidly. Could I, please... I have to go to the bathroom. Now that he'd said it, he was so afraid the man would refuse that his lip began to quiver. Quickly he bit down on it. He could just hear Michael calling him a crybaby, but even that thought made him feel sad. He wouldn't even mind seeing Michael right now. Jimmy, on the other hand, was starting to feel somewhat secure. Nobody was looking for this car. By now, the old guy who parked it was probably in his PJs watching It's a Wonderful Life for the 40th time. By tomorrow morning, when he and his wife started to holler about their stolen Toyota, Jimmy would be in Canada with Paige. God, I'm crazy about her. In his life, she was the closest he had ever come to a sure thing. All right, kid. In a couple of minutes, we'll get some gas, go to the John, and buy sodas and potato chips. Later on, we'll stop at McDonald's and get hamburgers. But just remember, you try to attract attention and... He pulled the pistol from his jacket pocket, pointed it at Brian, and made a clicking noise. Bang. I won't talk to anyone, I promise. Jimmy snapped. I promise, Daddy. Involuntarily, Brian's hand curled around the St. Christopher medal. He was going to bring this medal to Daddy, and then Daddy was going to get better. Then his dad would find this guy Jimmy and beat him up for being so mean to his son. Brian was sure of it. As his fingers traced the raised image of the towering figure carrying the Christ child, he spoke in a clear voice. I promise, Daddy. At Manhattan's One Police Plaza, the command post for the Jimmy Sidens manhunt, everyone was keenly aware that Sidens would not hesitate to kill again. Armed and dangerous was the caption under his picture on the flyers that were being distributed all over the city. Jack Shore growled to Mort Levy in disgust as he watched a team of officers answer the flood of calls on the police hotline. Last time we got 2,000 tips, followed up every useless one of them, and the only reason we ever got Sidens behind bars was because he was dumb enough to hold up a gas station in Detroit while a cop was on the premises. The rotund senior detective stood glowering down at him. No wonder Callie Hunter's afraid of you, Mort thought, remembering the fear in her eyes at Jack's anger and open hostility. He spoke absently. Anything more about Sidens' girlfriend? An hour ago, one of the prisoners in Sidens' cell block had told the police that Jimmy had bragged about a girlfriend named Paige, who he said was a world-class stripper. They were trying to trace her in New York, but on the hunch that she might have been involved with Sidens in Detroit, Shore had contacted the authorities there. No, nothing so far. Probably another dead end. A voice bellowed above the din in the room. Call for you from Detroit, Jack. Both men turned quickly. In 2 strides, Shore was at his desk and had grabbed the phone. His caller did not waste time. Stan Logan here. I may have something interesting for you. We've got a rap sheet on a Paige LaRonde who calls herself an exotic dancer. She left town 2 days ago, told a friend she didn't know if she'd be back, that she expected to join her boyfriend. Does anyone know where she's going? She told one friend California, another Mexico. Our guys are checking the train and bus stations as well as the airports to see if we can pick up her trail. We'll keep you posted. Right now we're about to fax you a rap sheet and publicity pictures. Don't show them to your kids. Shore slammed down the phone. My guess is that Jimmy met up with his girlfriend and the 2 of them are heading south of the border if they're not already eating enchiladas. And I still say one way or the other the go-between had to be Sidens' sister. But we still have to cover the cathedral tonight on the 1 in a million chance that Jimmy's offer to surrender was on the level, Mort thought. Somehow neither possibility rang true to him. Not Mexico, not the surrender. Would this woman, Paige, be smart enough to lie to her friends on the chance that the cops might come looking for her? Mort left his desk to pick up his ham and rye and overheard 2 women officers talking. Still no sign of that missing kid. For sure some nut must have picked him up. Mort Levy quickly forgot about his sandwich. What missing kid? Soberly, he listened to the details surrounding Brian Dornan's disappearance. Mort was thinking about his own 7-year-old son when a voice shouted from across the room. Call for you, Mort. Who is it? A woman. She didn't give her name. Mort pressed the phone to his ear. Detective Levy. He heard the sound of frightened breathing, and then a faint click as the line went dead. WCBS reporter Alan Graham approached the squad car where he'd interviewed Catherine Dornan an hour earlier. It was 8:30, and the intermittent gusts of snow had become a steady flow of large white flakes. Graham wondered how long Catherine Dornan would be able to maintain her remarkable composure. He watched her as she sat in the passenger seat of the squad car next to Officer Ortiz. Her son Michael was in the back with a handsome older woman whose arm was around him. He tapped on the window of the squad car. Catherine glanced up, then opened it. Mom, this is Alan Graham from WCBS. He interviewed me right after I spoke with you. Barbara Cavanaugh saw the compassion on the face of the young reporter, then asked, Any word? No, ma'am. We've had plenty of calls to the station, but they were all to express concern. Catherine looked at her mother. He's vanished. Catherine, dear, everyone who heard you on the radio is praying for Brian. You must have faith. Catherine felt frustration and anger rising inside her. Yes, she supposed she should have faith. Certainly Brian had faith. He believed in that St. Christopher medal, probably enough to have followed whoever picked up my wallet. She looked back at her mother, and at Michael beside her. She felt her anger ebb. It wasn't her mother's fault that any of this had happened. No. Faith, even in something as unlikely as a St. Christopher medal, was a good thing. "You're right, Mom." From the receiver in his ear, Graham heard the anchorman say, "Over to you now, Alan." Stepping back from the car, he began, "Brian Dornan's mother is still keeping watch at the spot where her son disappeared shortly after 5 p.m. Authorities believe Catherine Dornan's theory that Brian may have seen someone pick up her wallet and followed that person. The wallet contained a St. Christopher medal, which Brian was desperately anxious to bring to his father's hospital bed." Graham handed the microphone to Catherine. Despite how emotional she felt, her voice was steady. "Brian believes the St. Christopher medal will help his father get well. If I had had Brian's faith, I would have guarded my wallet more carefully, because the St. Christopher medal was in it. I want my husband to get better. I want my child. In the name of God, if anyone knows what happened to Brian, who has him, or where he is, please, please call us." Callie's eyes filled with tears, her lip quivering. She turned off the radio on Catherine's final plea. "I tried," she told herself fiercely. "I tried." She had dialed Detective Levy's number, but when she heard his voice, the enormity of what she was about to do overwhelmed her. They would arrest her, and they would take Gigi away. Again, Catherine Dornan's call for help rang in her ears. If anyone knows what happened to Brian. As she reached for the phone, she heard a wail from the bedroom. Callie rushed inside, gathered Gigi in her arms, and began rocking her. "Shh, it's okay. Everything's fine." Mommy, I dreamed that you were gone again. Please don't go, Mommy. Please don't leave me. I don't want to live with other people, ever, ever." "That won't happen, sweetheart, I promise." Jimmy Sidens lowered the volume on the car radio. "Your mom sure is flipping out about you, kid." Brian had to keep himself from reaching out to the dashboard and touching the radio. Mom sounded so worried. He had to get back to her. Now she believed in the St. Christopher medal, too. He was sure of it. There were a lot of cars on the highway, and even though it was really snowing now, and even though Jimmy was driving in the right lane, they were going pretty fast. Brian began to plan. If he could open the door real fast and roll out onto the road, he could keep rolling to the side. Just as Brian was about to pull on the door handle and release the seatbelt, a car, weaving erratically, cut in front of them. Jimmy slammed on the brakes. The car skidded and fishtailed, but Jimmy righted the car and drove on. He grinned in savage satisfaction as he looked down at Brian. "We're pretty lucky, aren't we, kiddo?" Brian was still clutching the door handle. "Now, you weren't thinking of jumping out, were you?" Jimmy clicked the control that locked the doors. "Keep your hand away from there. I see you touch that handle again, I'll break your fingers." Brian didn't have the slightest doubt he would do just that. It was 5 after 10. Mort Levy sat at his desk, deep in thought. He had only one explanation for the disconnected call: Callie Hunter. The tap from the surveillance van confirmed that she had dialed him. She knows something and she's afraid to tell, he thought. Should he go over to see her himself? Would it do any good? Every nerve in his body was telling him that he should talk to her. Despite her denials, he believed she held the key. As he turned away from his desk, the phone rang. This time, when he picked it up, he took the initiative. Callie, talk to me. Don't be afraid. Whatever it is, I'll help you." "Detective Levy, can you come here quick? I've got to talk to you about Jimmy and that little boy who's missing." The snow was coming down faster now. They were near Syracuse, and that meant in 3 or 4 hours he'd be across the border with Paige. There was a McDonald's sign on the right. Jimmy was hungry, and this would be a good place to get something to eat. It would have to last him until he reached Canada. He'd pull up to the drive-in window, then get back on the road fast. "If I stop at McDonald's, kid, can you look like you're sleeping?" "Yes, I promise." "Do it, then. Lean against me, with your eyes closed." Obediently, Brian slumped against Jimmy and squeezed his eyes shut. He tried not to show how scared he was. The St. Christopher medal felt heavy and comforting against his chest. "Now we'll see what kind of actor you are, and you better be good." Jimmy pulled off the highway. They had to wait online at the drive-in window. Jimmy froze when he saw a state trooper pull in behind them, but he had no choice except to stay put and not draw attention to himself. When it was their turn, he placed the order without incident. But at the pickup spot, the woman looked over the counter and noticed Brian. "I guess he just can't wait to see what Santa Claus is going to bring him, can he?" Jimmy nodded and tried to smile in agreement as he reached for the bag. She leaned way forward and peered into the car. "My goodness, is he wearing the St. Christopher medal? My dad was named after him and used to try to make a big deal of it, but my mom always jokes about St. Christopher being dropped from the calendar of saints. My dad says it's too bad Mom wasn't named Philomena. She's another saint the Vatican said didn't exist." With a hearty laugh, the young woman handed over the bag. Mort Levy hung up the phone, stunned. What possible connection could there be between Jimmy Sidens and the little Dornan boy who disappeared on Fifth Avenue? He had to inform his superiors, starting with Jack Shore, about Callie Hunter's call. Mort spotted Shore leaving the chief of detective's private office and was across the room in seconds. He grabbed Shore's arm. "Come back inside." "Sure, Mort. I was looking for you myself. We just heard from Logan in Detroit again. 2 days ago, a woman whose description matches Siden's girlfriend got a ride from a private car service over the border to Windsor. Logan's guys think that Paige LaRun told her girlfriends about California and Mexico to throw them off her trail. One girlfriend was questioned again. This time, it occurred to her to mention that she offered to buy LaRun's fur coat because it wouldn't be needed in Mexico. LaRun refused." "I never bought that Mexico story," Mort Levy thought. He didn't relinquish his grip on Shore's arm as he shoved open the chief's door. 5 minutes later, a squad car carrying Mort and the chief, Bud Folney, was racing up the East Side Drive to Avenue B and 10th Street. Bud Folney was a soft-spoken man in his late 40s and was considered to be one of the most powerful men in the department. It was widely believed among the ranks that one day he would be police commissioner. Mort Levy knew that if there was anyone who could help Callie, assuming she had in some way been forced to cover for Jimmy again, it was Folney. But the missing child... How could Jimmy Sidens be involved in this? It was a question they were both frantic to ask. Pete Cruz had been about to call it a day. He discovered where Callie Hunter lived, and now he was hoping her brother would show up. But there had been nothing to watch for hours except the falling snow. The van that he knew belonged to the police was still parked across the street from Hunter's apartment. Pete felt that the likelihood of Jimmy Sidens showing up at his sister's house was about the same as two strangers having matching DNA. All the hours of hanging around Hunter's building were a waste, Pete decided. Obviously, today wasn't going to be the day he would get the story that was going to make his name as a reporter. "It'll happen," Pete promised himself. "I won't always be working on this lousy 10-watt station." His buddy who worked at WNBC loved to ride Pete about his job. A favorite put-down was that the only audience for WYME were 2 cockroaches and 3 stray cats. Pete started his car. He was just about to pull out when a squad car raced down the block and stopped in front of Callie's building. Through narrowed eyes, Pete observed 2 men emerge from the squad car. One he recognized as Mort Levy. He didn't get a good look at the other one. Something was breaking. Pete turned off the engine, suddenly interested again. While she waited for Mort Levy, Callie took Gigi's Christmas presents from their hiding place behind the couch. Carefully, she stacked the presents she'd wrapped with candy cane paper in front of the tree. An outfit from the Gap, leggings and a polo shirt, crayons and a coloring book, some furniture for Gigi's dollhouse. everything, even the 2 pieces of the Gap outfit, was in separate boxes, so at least it looked as though Gigi had a stack of gifts to open. She tried to avoid looking at the largest package under the tree, the package that Gigi thought was their gift for Santa Claus. Finally, she phoned Ika Banks, swallowing hard over the lump in her throat. "Ika, can you come over and maybe stay overnight? I'm in big trouble." Leanne Winnick, the producer of Fox 5 10 o'clock News, spoke to Catherine and Michael as they exited the TV studio. "The phones haven't stopped ringing. It looks as though everyone in our viewing area wants you to know how they're rooting and praying for Brian and your husband. Our operators are thanking everyone in your name, but is there anything else you'd like us to tell our audience?" Catherine drew a deep breath and put her arm tightly around Michael. "I wish you'd tell them that we think the reason Brian was so anxious to get my wallet back is that my mother had just given me a St. Christopher medal that my father wore through World War II. My father believed the medal kept him safe. It even has a dent where a bullet glanced off it, a bullet that might have killed him. Brian has the same wonderful faith that St. Christopher, or what he represents, is going to take care of us again. And so do I. St. Christopher will carry Brian back to us on his shoulders, and will help my husband get well." She smiled down at Michael. "Right, pal? Mom, do you really believe that?" Catherine drew a deep breath as she thought, "I believe. Lord, help my unbelief." Firmly, she said aloud, "Yes, I do." And maybe because it was Christmas Eve, for the first time, she really did. State Trooper Chris McNally tuned out as Deirdre Linehan droned on about just seeing a St. Christopher medal and how her father was named after St. Christopher. She was a well-meaning young woman, but every time he stopped for coffee at this McDonald's, she seemed to be on duty and always wanted to talk. Tonight, Chris was too preoccupied with thoughts of getting home. He wanted to get some sleep before his kids got up to open their Christmas presents. He also had been thinking about the Toyota he had just seen pull out in front of him. He'd been thinking of buying one himself, although he knew his wife Eileen wouldn't want a brown one. A new car meant monthly payments to worry about. We could use a new car, he thought, as he noticed the remnant of a bumper sticker on the Toyota, a single word, inheritance. He knew the sticker. He had seen one like it before. It had originally said, "We're spending our grandchildren's inheritance." Eileen and I could use an inheritance, he thought. Chris forced himself to refocus and reached for the burger bag Deirdre was dangling in her hand. It was clear she was not going to relinquish it until she had told Chris how her dad said it was too bad that her mother hadn't been named Philomena. Chris managed to snare the bag. "Well, I was named after St. Christopher myself. Merry Christmas, Deirdre." "And it will be Christmas before I get a bite out of this Big Mac," he thought as he drove back onto the thruway. With one hand, he deftly opened the bag, freed the burger, and gratefully took a large bite. Near exit 40, he drove the car to the official turnaround, from which he could park and observe errant drivers. As Chris opened the lid on his coffee, he frowned. A Corvette doing at least 80 was racing up the service lane. He snapped on his lights and siren, shifted into gear, and the squad car leaped in pursuit. Chief of Detectives Bud Falney listened with quiet attentiveness as a trembling Callie Hunter told Mort Levy about finding the wallet on Fifth Avenue. "I picked it up without thinking. I guessed it belonged to that woman, but I wasn't sure. I honestly wasn't sure. And I thought if I tried to give it back to her, she might say something was missing from it. That very thing once happened to my grandmother, and then you'd send me back to prison and—" Mort patted her arm. "Hey, Callie, take it easy. What happened then?" She told them about finding Jimmy in the apartment, wearing her deceased husband's clothes. She pointed to the big package under the tree. "The guard's uniform and coat are in there. It was the only place I could think to hide them in case she came back." That's it, Mort thought. When we looked around the apartment the second time, there was something different about the closet. The box on the shelf and the man's leather jacket were missing. Callie's voice became ragged and uneven as she told them about Jimmy taking Brian Dornan and threatening to kill him if he spotted a cop chasing him. Mort asked, "Callie, if he's left alone, do you think Jimmy can be trusted to release Brian?" "I wanted to think so. That's what I told myself when I didn't call you immediately. But I know he's desperate. Jimmy will do anything to keep from going to prison again." Folney finally asked a question. "Callie, why did you call us now?" "I saw Brian's mother on television, and I knew that if Jimmy had taken Gigi, I'd want you to help me get her back. The look on that little boy's face, the way he put that medal around his neck and was holding on to it like it was a life preserver. If anything happens to him, it's my fault." The door buzzer rang. Folney jumped up to answer it. It was Ika Banks. She looked at the policeman searchingly, then rushed to Callie and hugged her. Callie winced in pain. Ika peeled up her friend's sleeve. The bruises caused by Jimmy's fingers were now an ugly purple. Any doubts that Bud Folney had about Callie Hunter's possible cooperation with her brother immediately disappeared. 10 minutes later, when they left Callie's apartment, Mort Levy was carrying the bulky gift-wrap package containing the guard's uniform. In the squad car, the two men agreed that the search for Jimmy Sidens would be based on the assumption that he might be trying to reach Canada. Folney said, "He's got to be in a car. There's no way he'll travel on public transportation with that child." Callie had told them that from the time he was 12 years old, Jimmy could hotwire and steal any car. She was sure he must have had one waiting near the apartment. "My guess is that Sidens is heading for Canada. The thruway's the quickest route, but he might have wanted to get out of New York State as fast as possible, in which case he'd go through New England." It all fit together. The alert that went out to the state police also contained Callie's final certainty. On a chain around his neck, Brian Dornan may be wearing a bronze St. Christopher medal the size of a silver dollar. Pete Cruz watched as the police detectives emerged from Callie Hunter's building. This time he got a good look at the other man and whistled silently. It was Bud Folney, chief of detectives and next in line to be the police commissioner. Something was breaking, something big, and Pete Cruz was determined to scoop everyone. As he was wondering about his next move, he saw the woman he knew to be Callie's babysitter leave the building. In a flash, he was out of the car and caught up with her when she was out of sight of the police van. Excuse me, I'm Detective Cruz. I've been instructed to see you safely home. How is Mrs. Hunter doing?" "Oh, that poor girl. Officer, you people have to believe her. She thought she was doing the right thing when she didn't phone right away about her brother kidnapping that little boy." Even though Brian was hungry, the hamburger was hard to swallow. He knew Jimmy was the reason for that. He took a sip of Coke and tried to think about how Daddy would beat up Jimmy for being so mean to him. That was all he could think about now, because that was all he wanted, to be home and have Daddy and Mommy smiling the way they always did when they were together. He knew things were bad when he wished his jerk brother was here with him. Brian closed his hand over the St. Christopher medal and mentally pictured the strong saint who carried the little kid across the dangerous river, who had taken care of his grandfather, who would make Dad get better, and who would... Brian closed his eyes. He didn't finish the wish, but in his mind he could see himself on the shoulders of the saint. Barbara Cavanaugh was waiting for Catherine and Michael in the green room at Channel 5. "You both did a great job." Then she saw the exhaustion on her daughter's face. "Catherine, please come back to the apartment. The police will get in touch with you there as soon as they have any word about Brian. You look ready to drop." "I can't, Mother. I know it's foolish, but when I left your apartment, I had my 2 little boys with me, and when I go back, they're going to be with me too. I'll wait here." 20 minutes later, Catherine, her mother, and Michael were watching the green room's television monitor. The news bite was about Mario Bernardi, the wounded prison guard. Although still critical, his condition had stabilized. According to the news anchor, there is still no trace of Mario Bernardi's assailant, Jimmy Siddons, who was awaiting trial for the murder of a police officer. Siddons is known to be armed and should be considered extremely dangerous. Jimmy Siddons' mugshots were flashed on the screen. Michael studied the cold eyes and sneering lips of the escaped convict. He looks mean. Their attention was diverted when the door of the green room opened. Officer Manuel Ortiz ushered in a tall man in his late 40s. "Detective Rhodes wants to talk to you, Mrs. Dornan." Catherine saw the grave look on the faces of both Rhodes and Ortiz, and fear paralyzed her. She was unable to move or speak. Ortiz realized what she was thinking. "No, Mrs. Dornan, it isn't that." Rhodes took over. "I'm from headquarters, Mrs. Dornan. We have information about Brian, but let me begin by saying that as far as we know, he's alive and unharmed." Catherine listened as Detective Rhodes explained about her wallet being picked up by a young woman who was the sister of escaped prisoner Jimmy Siddons. Her mind did not want to accept that Brian had been abducted by the murderer whose face she had just seen on the television screen. "No," she thought. "No, that can't be." "We think he's heading for Canada, probably in a stolen car. We're concentrating the search in that direction. We feel sure it's the right guess. We have every trooper throughout New York and New England on the alert for a man traveling with a young boy who is wearing a St. Christopher medal." Now Michael spoke up. "Brian is wearing the medal? Then he'll be all right. Gran, tell Mom the medal will take care of Brian like it took care of Grandpa." Rhodes spoke urgently. "Mrs. Dornan, Siddons is probably listening to the radio. He's smart. Now that Officer Bernardi is out of danger, Siddons knows he isn't facing a death sentence, and he did tell his sister that he'd let Brian go tomorrow morning." "But, Officer, you don't believe that, do you?" She did not need to see the expression on his face to know Detective Rhodes did not believe Jimmy Siddons would voluntarily release Brian. "Mrs. Dornan, if we're right and Siddons is heading for the Canadian border, he's not going to get there for at least another 3 or 4 hours. Although the snow has stopped in some areas, the roads is still something of a mess. He can't be traveling fast, and he doesn't know that we know he has Brian. That's being kept from the media. We've got every state trooper in the Northeast on the alert. In Siddons' mind, Brian will be an asset, at least until he reaches the border. We'll find him before then." The television monitor was still on with the volume low. Catherine's back was to it. She saw Detective Rhodes's face change as she heard the anchorman's voice. "We interrupt this program for a news bulletin. According to a report that has just been broadcast by station WYME, 7-year-old Brian Dornan, the boy who has been missing since this afternoon, has fallen into the hands of alleged murderer Jimmy Siddons, who is believed to be heading for Canada. Siddons told his sister that if the police close in on him, he will put a bullet through the child's head. More later as news comes in." Jimmy Siddons swore silently. He had just passed a state trooper's car stopped in back of a sports car. The sight of a trooper made him sweat all over. He was getting jumpy. The steady rise and fall of Brian's chest told Jimmy Siddons that his hostage was asleep. Good, he thought. Better for me. It was past 11 o'clock. The kid should be tired. With luck, he'd sleep for a couple of hours anyhow. Even with the snow on the roads, they should be at the border in, at most, 3 or 4 hours. Jimmy debated about where he should leave the Toyota. There was nothing to tie him to it as long as he made sure he wiped it clean of fingerprints. He thought of the Niagara River, where he would make the border crossing. It had a strong current, so chances were it wouldn't be frozen. With luck, the car might never surface. What to do about the kid? Even as he asked himself the question, Jimmy knew there was no way he'd take a chance on the kid being found near the border and able to talk about him. He reflected for a moment, then decided the Niagara River would take care of the car and the kid. That decision made, Jimmy felt some of the tension ease from his body. With every mile, he felt more sure that he was going to make it, that Canada and Paige and freedom were within reach. And with each mile he felt more anxious and more determined that nothing happened to screw it up. He had the radio turned on, but static was breaking up the signal. Impatiently, Jimmy twiddled the dial until he found an all-news station, then froze as an announcer's urgent voice reported, "Police have reluctantly confirmed the story broken by station WYME that 7-year-old Brian Dornan, missing since 5 o'clock this evening, has fallen into the hands of escaped murderer Jimmy Siddons, who is believed to be heading for Canada." Swearing steadily, Jimmy snapped off the radio. Callie. She must have called the cops. The thruway's probably already lousy with them all looking for me and the kid, he reasoned frantically. Calm, keep it calm, he told himself. They didn't know what kind of car he was driving. But the kid was a problem. He had to get rid of him. He thought the situation through quickly. He'd get off at the next exit, get rid of him fast, and then get back on the road. He looked at the boy sleeping beside him. Too bad, kid. But that's the way it's gotta be. Catherine Dornan reached out to put her arms around her older son. "Michael, we mustn't forget that Brian has the St. Christopher medal." Michael's mask of adult bravado began to crumble. "I don't want anything to happen to Brian." Catherine stroked his head. "Nothing is going to happen to him. Believe that, and hold on to it." She turned to her mother. "Remember how Dad used to tell us about the Christmas Eve when he was only 22 years old? When he was in the thick of the Battle of the Bulge and he took a couple of soldiers in his company into one of the towns on the fringe of the battle line. Why don't you tell Michael about it?" Her mother took up the story. There had been a report of enemy activity there, but it turned out not to be true. On the way back to their battalion, they passed the village church. Midnight Mass had just started. They could see that the church was packed. In the midst of all that fear and danger, everyone had left their homes for the service. Their voices singing Silent Night drifted out into the square. Dad said it was the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard. Barbara Cavanaugh smiled at her grandson. Grandpa and the other soldiers went into the church. Grandpa used to tell me how scared all of them had been until they saw the faith and courage of those villagers. Here these people were, surrounded by fierce fighting. They had almost no food. Yet those villagers believed that somehow they'd make it through that terrible time. Her lower lip quivered, but her voice was steady as she continued. Grandpa said that was when he knew he was going to come home to me. And it was an hour later that the St. Christopher medal kept the bullet from going through his heart. Catherine looked over Michael's head to Officer Ortiz. "Please take us to the cathedral now. I want to go to midnight Mass. The only way I can help is to pray." In his office, Chief of Detectives Folney stood in front of an enlarged map of the Northeast. It was crisscrossed with routes outlined in different colors. Folney picked up a pointer and spoke to his detective. "Here's where we're at, Mort. We've got to assume that Siddons had a car waiting when he left his sister's place. Siddons probably isn't any more than 4 to 6 hours from the border." Folney gave a decisive thump to the map. "We've got a special alert along the border, but with the snow and heavy traffic he could still be missed, and we all know that someone like Siddons probably knows how to get into Canada without going through a checkpoint." He waited for Mort's comments. "Well, how about staging an accident on the major roads to force a one-laner about 20 miles before the border?" "I wouldn't rule that out, Mort, but on the same principle as erecting a barrier, traffic would build up in 2 minutes and Siddons might just try to get off at the nearest exit. If we go ahead with that plan, we'll have to put barriers at all the exits as well." Mort Levy hesitated. "And if Siddons feels trapped..." "Sir, Callie Hunter believes her brother is capable of killing both Brian and himself rather than get captured. I think she knows what she's talking about." Jack Shore stood in the doorway glaring at Mort Levy. "And if she had had the guts to call us the minute Jimmy left the house with that boy, he wouldn't have gotten out of Manhattan." Now Jack turned to Bud Folney. "A new development, sir. A state trooper, Chris McNally, got a burger about 20 minutes ago at the travel plaza between Syracuse exit 39 and Weedsport exit 40 on the thruway. He didn't pay much attention at the time, but the woman at the pickup station, a Miss Deirdre Lenehan, was talking about a St. Christopher medal that some kid was wearing. Folney snapped. Where is the Lenehan woman now? Her shift ended at 11. They're trying to track her down now. But if Callie Hunter had called us earlier, none of this would have happened. We could have been at every travel plaza on the thruway. Bud Folney rarely raised his voice, but his increasing frustration over the agonizing twists in the manhunt for Jimmy Sidens made him suddenly lose his temper. Shut up, Jack. If onlys don't help now. Do something useful. Get the radio stations in that area to broadcast a plea to Deirdre Lenehan to contact the state police. And for God's sake, don't let anyone connect her to Sidens or that child. Got it? From his perch just off the road, Chris McNally kept a watchful eye on the cars passing before him. The snow had finally ended, but the roadway remained icy. Although he was focused on the flow of traffic on the highway, he still could not get his mind off the report of the missing child. The minute the alert had come in about the little boy held hostage by an escaped cop killer, a little boy wearing a St. Christopher medal, Chris had phoned McDonald and asked to speak to Deirdre Lenehan. Even though he hadn't really been paying close attention, he remembered that she had been going on about just such a little boy wearing a medal. The thought of possibly having been so close to the kidnapped child drove Chris wild. The problem was, he realized, thinking back over his conversation with Deirdre, the car with the little boy could have come through there anywhere between a few minutes and an hour before she told him about it. Still, it was the only lead they had, so they had to treat it seriously. His radio went on. It was headquarters, and his captain's voice was urgent. Chris, the New York City police think your tip is the closest thing they have to a chance of saving that kid's life. We're going to keep on beating the bushes looking for the Lenehan woman, but in the meantime, rack your brain. Try to remember if there was anything else she might have said, anything that might be of some help. I'm trying, sir. I'm on the thruway now. If it's all right with you, I'd like to start driving west. If the guy was on the McDonald's line about the same time as I was, he's got about a 10 to 15-minute lead on me. If I can pick up a little time on him, I'd sure like to be in the vicinity when word does come through from Deirdre. I'd like to be there when we get him. Okay, go ahead. And Chris, for God's sake, think. Are you sure that she didn't say anything more specific about either the kid with the St. Christopher medal or maybe about the car he was in? A word jumped into Chris's mind. Just. Was it his imagination, or had Deirdre said, I just saw a kid wearing a St. Christopher medal? If Deirdre had said just, maybe she meant the brown Toyota in front of him at the McDonald's. What had been the license plate number on that car? He couldn't remember, but he had noticed something about it. What was it? His thoughts were interrupted by the captain's sharp voice. Chris quickly responded. I'm sorry, sir. I was trying to remember something. I think Deirdre said she had just seen the kid wearing the medal. If she meant that literally, then it could have been the car directly in front of me on the line. That was a brown Toyota with New York plates. Do you remember any part of the number? No, I'm drawing a blank. And the car, there was definitely a little boy in it? I'm not sure. That's not much help, McNally. Every third car on the road is probably a Toyota, and tonight they're all so dirty you can't tell one color from another. Let's hope we hear from that Lenehan woman, and in the meantime, head west toward the border. We'll check in later. At least it feels as if I'm doing something, Chris thought as he turned the ignition key and pressed his foot on the gas. The squad car leaped forward. One thing I do know is how to drive, he thought grimly as he steered the vehicle onto the breakdown lane and began passing the cautious motorists along the way. As he drove, he continued to try to remember what exactly he had seen in front of him. It was there, imprinted in his mind, he was sure of that. If only he could call it up. As he strained to recall, every inch of his 6'4" frame was warning him that time was running out for the missing boy. Jimmy was seething. It had taken him half an hour to get to the nearest exit. Jimmy knew he had to get off the thruway now so he could get rid of the kid. He switched to the right lane. A sign told him he was within half a mile of exit 41 and a town named Waterloo. Waterloo for the kid, he thought with grim satisfaction. The snow had stopped, but he wasn't sure that was good for him. The slush was turning to ice, and that slowed him up more. Plus, without the snow, it was easier for any cops who might be driving by to get a look at him. Suddenly, the brake lights flashed on the car ahead of him, and Jimmy watched with increasing anger and frustration as the rear of the car fishtailed. Jerk! 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 Brian sat up straight, fully awake. Jimmy began to curse, a steady stream of invective flowing as he realized what had happened. A snowplow, 4 or 5 cars in front, had just switched into the exit lane. Instinctively, he steered the Toyota into the middle lane and barely managed to avoid the fishtailing car. As he pulled abreast of the snowplow, they were just passing the exit. He slammed the wheel with his fist. Now he'd have to wait until exit 42 to get off the thruway. How far was that, he wondered. Jimmy felt for the gun holster under his jacket. Should he take it out and hide it under the seat? No, he decided. If a cop tried to stop him, he needed it just where it was. Finally, he saw a sign that informed him the next exit was in 6 miles. Even at this pace, it shouldn't take more than 15 minutes. There was still a long way to go, but just knowing that he was this close to the Canadian border and Paige was so exciting a sensation that he could almost taste it. This time he'd make it work, and whatever he did, this time he wouldn't be dumb enough to be caught by the cops. The magnificent sound of the orchestra, led by the organ and accompanied by the choir, filled St. Patrick's Cathedral, which was already packed with midnight worshippers. Joyful, joyful, the choir sang. Joyful, joyful, Catherine thought. Please, God, yes, let this night end like that. The music changed to a swirling paean of triumph as the procession began. The choir, the acolytes, deacon, priests, and bishops preceding the cardinal who was carrying the crook of the shepherd in his hand. Catherine sank to her knees. Lamb of God, Catherine prayed, please, please save my little lamb. Chief of Detectives Folney knew that with each passing minute the chances of finding Brian Dornan alive grew slimmer. Mort Levy and Jack Shore were across the desk from him. As he spoke, Folney's gaze was riveted on the map of the thruway on the wall. Canada. He's on his way to Canada, and he's getting close to the border. They had just received further word from Michigan. Paige LaRonde had closed all her bank accounts the day she left Detroit, and in a burst of confidence she had told another dancer that she had been in touch with a guy who was a genius at creating fake IDs. It was reported that she had said, "Let me tell you, with the kind of papers I got from my boyfriend and me, we can both just disappear." Folney turned to Levy. Nothing from the thruway guys? This was the 3rd time in 15 minutes that Folney had asked the same question. Nothing, sir. Well, call them again. I want to talk to Trooper McNally. But before Folney could be connected with McNally, an assistant rushing into Folney's office said another call had come in. Hot lead. Sidens and the kid were seen by a trooper about an hour ago at a rest area on Route 91 in Vermont near White River Junction. He said the man matches Sidens' description to a T, and the boy was wearing some kind of medal. Mort, forget McNally, Folney said. I want to talk to the trooper who saw them, and right now call the Vermont police and have them put up barriers at all the exits north of the sighting. For all we know, the girlfriend may be holed up waiting for him in a farmhouse on this side of the border. While Folney waited, he again looked over at Mort. Call Callie Hunter and tell her what we've just learned. Ask her if she knows if Jimmy has ever been to Vermont, and if so, where did he go? There might be some place in particular he could be headed. Brian could tell that the car was going faster. He opened his eyes, then shut them as fast as he could. It was easier to stay lying down, curled up on the seat, pretending to be asleep instead of trying not to act scared when Jimmy looked at him. He also had been listening to the radio. Even though the volume was turned way down, he could hear what they were saying. That cop killer Jimmy Sidens, who had shot a prison guard, had kidnapped Brian Dornan. His mother had been reading a book named Kidnapped to him and Michael. Brian liked the story a lot, but when they went to bed, Michael told him he thought it was dumb. He said that if anyone tried to kidnap him, he'd kick the guy and punch him and run away. Well, I can't run away, Brian thought, and he was sure that trying to hurt Jimmy by punching him wouldn't work either. Brian was almost crying. He could feel his nose filling up and his eyes getting watery. He tried to think about how Michael might call him a crybaby or a dork. Sometimes those thoughts helped him when he was trying not to cry. It didn't help now, though. Even Michael would probably cry if he was scared and in the same situation. It said right on the radio that Jimmy was dangerous. But even though he was crying, Brian made sure he didn't make a sound. He felt the tears on his cheeks, but he didn't move to brush them away. If he moved his hand, Jimmy would notice and know he was awake, and for now it was safer to keep pretending. Instead, he clasped the St. Christopher medal even tighter and made himself think about how when Dad was able to go back home, they were going to put up their own Christmas tree and open the presents. Just before they had left for New York, Mrs. Emerson, who lived next door, had come in to say goodbye, and he had heard her say to his mom, "Catherine, no matter when it is, the night you put up your tree, we're all going to come and sing Christmas carols under your window." Then she hugged Brian and said, "I know your favorite carol." It was Silent Night. He'd sung it all by himself in the first-grade Christmas pageant at school last year. Brian tried to sing it to himself now, in his mind, but he couldn't get past the two words, Silent Night. He knew if he kept thinking about it, he wouldn't be able to keep Jimmy from knowing that he was crying. Then he almost jumped. Someone on the radio was talking about Jimmy and him again. The man was saying that a state trooper in Vermont was sure he had seen Jimmy Sidens and a young boy in an old Dodge or Chevrolet at a rest stop on Route 91 in Vermont. The search was being concentrated there. Jimmy's grim smile vanished as quickly as it had come. The first surge of relief at hearing the news bulletin was followed by instant caution. Had some fool claimed he'd spotted them in Vermont, he wondered? It was possible, he decided. Even so, being on the thruway was really beginning to spook him. The road was good and he could make time, but the nearer you got to the border, the more state troopers were likely to be on the road. The sign looking before him read, "Exit 42, Geneva, 1 mile ahead." A brown Toyota. That's what Chris McNally kept looking for. Finding it was the one chance. He knew it. What was it about the license plate? He clenched his teeth, again trying hard to remember. There had been something about it. Think, damn it, he told himself. Think. He didn't for 1 minute believe the report that Sidens and the kid had been spotted in Vermont. Every gut instinct kept telling Chris that they were nearby. Exit 42 to Geneva was coming up. That meant the border was only another 100 miles or so away. If Jimmy Sidens was in this vicinity, he could look forward to being out of the country in less than 2 hours. What was there about the license plate of the Toyota? He asked himself once more. Chris's eyes narrowed. He could see a dark Toyota in the passing lane that was moving fast. He switched lanes and drove up beside it, praying that it held a man with a young boy. Give me a chance to find that child. Dear God, just a chance. Chris continued past the Toyota. He had been able to see a young couple inside. The guy was driving with his arm around the girl. Not a good idea on an icy road. Another time he'd have pulled him over. Chris stepped on the gas. The road was clearer, the traffic was better spaced, but that meant that everything was moving faster and closer to Canada. His radio was on low when a call came in for him. "Trooper McNally, this is New York City Chief of Detectives Bud Folney calling you from One Police Plaza. I just spoke to your supervisor again. The Vermont sighting is a washout. The Lenehan woman can't be located. Tell me what you reported earlier about a brown Toyota." Chris explained that if Deirdre had been talking about the car directly ahead of him in the McDonald's line, she was talking about a brown Toyota with New York plates. "And you can't remember the license?" "No, sir, but there was something unusual about it." McNally was almost at exit 42. As he watched the road, a vehicle 2 cars ahead switched into the exit lane. His casual glance became a stare. "Oh, my God." "Trooper, what is it?" "That's it! The bumper sticker. There was just a piece of it left and it read inheritance. Sir, I'm following that Toyota down the exit ramp right now." "Don't lose that car, Trooper, and for God's sake, remember, he's threatened to kill the child before he lets himself get captured." Now that Jimmy was off the thruway, he felt somewhat relieved, despite a gnawing sense that things were closing in on him. He was running low on gas, but was afraid to risk stopping at a station with the kid in the car. He was on Route 14 South. That connected with Route 20 in about 6 miles. Route 20 led to the border. There was a lot less traffic here than on the thruway. Most people were home by now anyway, asleep or getting ready for Christmas morning. It was unlikely that anyone would be looking for him here. Still, he reasoned, the best thing to do was get on some of the local streets and find some place where he could stop without being noticed, and do what he had to do. As he took the next right-hand turn, he glanced in the rearview mirror. His antennae went up. He thought he had seen headlights reflected there as he made the turn, but now he didn't see them anymore. "I'm getting too jumpy," he thought. A block later, they were in a residential area of Geneva, quiet and dark. The houses were mostly unlit, except for Christmas lights glowing from bushes and evergreens on the snow-covered lawns. He couldn't be sure if the kid was really asleep or faking it. Not that it mattered. This was the sort of place he needed. He drove 6 blocks and then saw what he was looking for. A school with a long driveway that led to a parking area. His eyes missed nothing as he carefully searched the area for any sign of an approaching car or someone out walking. Then he stopped the car and opened the window halfway, listening intently for any hint of trouble. The cold instantly turned his breath to steam. He could hear nothing but the hum of the Toyota's engine. It was quiet out there, silent. Still, he decided to drive around the block one more time just to be sure he wasn't being followed. As the car slowly moved forward, he kept his gaze glued to the rearview mirror. Damn! He'd been right. There was a car behind him, running without lights. Now it was moving too. The lights from a brilliantly lit tree reflected on its rooftop dome. A squad car! Cops! Damn them! Jimmy swore under his breath. Damn them! Damn them! He tromped on the gas pedal. It might be his last ride, but he'd make it a good one. He glanced at the speedometer. 50, 60, 70. The cop chasing him didn't have backup yet. What would he do if he heard a shot and saw the kid get pushed out of the car? He'd stop to try to help him, Jimmy reasoned. I'd better do it right away, he thought, before he does have time to call in help. He reached inside his jacket for his gun. Just then, the car hit a patch of ice and began to skid. Jimmy dropped the gun in his lap, turned the wheels in the direction of the skid, then managed to straighten the car just inches away from crashing into a tree at the edge of the sidewalk. Nobody can drive like I can, he thought grimly. Then he picked up the gun again and released the safety catch. If the cop stops for the kid, I'll make it to Canada, he promised himself. He released the lock on the passenger door and reached across the terrified boy to open it. Chris McNally had known it the minute Jimmy spotted him. The radio was open between him and headquarters and was tied in to one police plaza in Manhattan. He knows he's being followed, sir. He's taking off like a bat out of hell. Don't lose him. Bud Fulney's voice was followed by the voice of the state police dispatcher. We've got 10 cars on the way, Chris. They're running silent and on dim lights. They'll surround you. We're bringing in a chopper, too. Chris pressed his foot on the accelerator. Keep them out of sight. He's going 70. There's not many cars out, but these streets aren't completely cleared. This is getting dangerous." As Seidens raced across an intersection, Chris watched in horror as he barely missed slamming into another car. Seidens was driving like a maniac. There was going to be an accident. He knew it. He reported in. Passing Lakewood Avenue. 2 blocks later, he saw the Toyota skid and almost hit a tree. "The boy!" Folney demanded. "What is it?" "The passenger door of the Toyota just opened. The inside light's on so I can see the kid struggling. Oh, God, Seidens has his gun out. It looks like he's going to shoot him." The voices of the choir filled the great cathedral. Kyrie eleison. "Lord, have mercy," Barbara Kavanaugh prayed. "Save my lamb," Catherine begged. "Run, Dork, run, get away from him," Michael shouted in his mind. Jimmy Seidens was crazy. Brian had never been in a car before that was going so fast. He wasn't sure what was going on, but there must be someone following them. Brian looked away from the road for a moment and glanced at Jimmy. He had his gun out. He felt Jimmy tugging at his seatbelt, releasing it. Then he reached across Brian and opened the door beside him. He could feel the cold air rushing in. For a moment, he was paralyzed with fear. Then he sat up very straight. He realized what was about to happen. Jimmy meant to shoot him and then push him out of the car. He had to get away. He was still clutching the metal in his right hand. He felt Jimmy poke him in the side with the gun, pushing him toward the open door and the roadway rushing beneath them. Holding on to the seatbelt buckle with his left hand, he swung out blindly with his right. The metal arced and slammed into Jimmy's face, catching him in his left eye. Jimmy yelled and took his hand off the wheel, instinctively slamming his foot on the brake. As he grabbed his eye, the gun went off. The bullet whistled past Brian's ear as the out-of-control car began to spin around. It jumped the curb, went up into a corner lawn, and caught on a bush. Still spinning, it slowed as it dragged the bush back across the lawn and out onto the edge of the road. Jimmy was swearing now, one hand again on the wheel, the other aiming the gun. Blood dripped into his eye from a gash across his forehead. Brian dove for the door and rolled out into the snow-covered lawn just as a second bullet passed over his shoulder. Chris barely managed to control his skidding patrol car. Jesus Christ! The kid's out of the car! Risking everything, he jammed on the brakes and skidded to a stop behind the Toyota. Oh my God! Over the car's radio, Bud Folney was shouting, but Chris didn't hear him. He was already out of his car and running toward the boy. Seidens was in control of the Toyota again and had turned it, clearly planning to run over Brian. In what seemed like an eternity but was actually only seconds, Chris had crossed the space between him and Brian and gathered the boy in his arms. The car was racing toward them, its passenger door still open and its interior still illuminated so that the maniacal anger in Jimmy Seidens' face was clearly visible. Clutching Brian tightly against him, Chris dove to the side and rolled down a snowy incline just as the wheels of the Toyota passed inches from their heads. An instant later, with a sickening sound of metal crashing and glass breaking, the vehicle careened off the porch of the house and flipped over. For a moment, there was silence. And then the quiet was shattered as sirens screamed and wailed. Lights from a dozen squad cars brightened the night as swarms of troopers raced to surround the overturned vehicle. Chris lay in the snow for a few seconds, hugging Brian to him, listening to the convergence of sounds. Then he heard a small, relieved voice. "Are you St. Christopher?" "No, but right now I feel like him, Brian. Merry Christmas, son." Officer Manuel Ortiz slipped noiselessly through the side door of the cathedral and instantly caught Catherine's eye. He smiled and nodded his head. She jumped up and ran to meet him. "Is he?" "He's fine. They're sending him back in a police helicopter. He'll be here by the time Mass is over." Noticing that one of the television cameras was trained on them, Ortiz raised his hand and made a circle of his thumb and forefinger, a symbol that for this moment, on this most special of days, everything was A-OK. Mort Levy spoke to Bud Folney. "I'm going to let Callie know what's happened. Sir, I know she should have called us earlier, but I hope—" "Don't worry, Mort. I'm not going to play Scrooge tonight. She worked with us. She deserves a break." Folney paused, thinking. "Listen, there's got to be some toys left in the station houses. Tell the guys to get busy and round some up for that little girl of Callie's. Have them meet us at Callie's building in 45 minutes. Mort, you and I are going to give them to her. Sure? You go home." It was Brian's first helicopter ride, and even though he was incredibly tired, he was too excited to even think about closing his eyes. He was sorry Officer McNally, Chris as he had said he should call him, hadn't been able to come with him. But he had been with Brian when they took Jimmy Sidens away, and he had told him not to worry, that this was one guy who would never get out of prison again. And then he had gotten the St. Christopher medal out of the car for Brian. As the helicopter came down, it looked like it was almost landing on the river. He recognized the 59th Street Bridge and the Roosevelt Island tramway. His dad had taken him for a ride on that. He wondered suddenly if his father knew what had happened to him. He turned to one of the officers. "My dad's in a hospital near here. I have to go see him. He might be worried." When the buzzer sounded at Callie's Avenue B apartment, she answered it with the resigned belief that she was going to be arrested. Detective Levy had called to say only that he and another officer were coming by. But it was two beaming, self-appointed Santa Clauses who arrived at her door, laden with dolls and games, and a sparkling white wicker doll carriage. As she watched, unbelieving, Bud Folney placed the gifts under and around the Christmas tree. "Callie, your information about your brother was a tremendous help. The Dornan boy is okay and on his way back to the city. Jimmy is on his way back to prison. He's our responsibility once again, and I promise we won't let him get away this time. From now on, I hope it gets a lot better for you." Callie felt as though a giant weight had been lifted from her. "Thank you. Thank you." Folney and Levy chorused Merry Christmas, and then they were gone. At last, Callie knew she could go to bed and sleep. Gigi's even breathing was an answered prayer. From now on, she'd be able to hear it every night and listen without fear that her little girl would be taken away from her again. "Everything will get better," she thought. "I know it now." As she fell asleep, her last thought was that when Gigi saw that the big package with Santa's present was missing from under the Christmas tree, she could honestly tell her that Santa Claus had come and taken it away. The recessional was about to start when once again the side door of the cathedral opened and Officer Ortiz entered. This time he was not alone. He bent down to the small boy beside him and pointed. Before Catherine could get to her feet, Brian was in her arms, the St. Christopher medal he was wearing pressed against her heart. As she held him close, she said nothing, but felt the silent tears of relief and joy course down her cheeks, knowing that he once again was safe and firm in her belief now that Tom was going to make it too. Barbara also did not speak, but leaned over and laid her hand on her grandson's head. It was Michael who broke the silence with whispered words of welcome. "Hi, Dork." Christmas morning dawned cold and clear. At 10 o'clock, Catherine, Brian, and Michael arrived at the hospital. Dr. Spence Crawley was waiting for them when they got off the elevator. "My God, Catherine, are you okay? I hadn't heard about what happened to Brian until I got here this morning. You must be exhausted." "Thanks, Spence. But I'm fine. We're all fine. But how is Tom? When I called this morning, all they would say was that he had had a good night." "And he did. It's an excellent sign. He had a very good night. A lot better than yours, that's for sure. I hope you don't mind, but I decided it was best if I told Tom about Brian. The press have been calling here all morning, and I didn't want to risk his hearing about it from an outsider. When I told him, I started with the happy ending, of course." Catherine felt relief rush through her. I'm glad he knows, Spence. I didn't know how to tell him. I couldn't be sure how he'd handle it. He took it very well, Catherine. He's a lot stronger than you might think. Crawley looked at the medal around Brian's neck. I understand you went through a lot to make sure you'd be able to give that medal to your dad. I promise all of you that between St. Christopher and me, we'll make sure he gets well. Impatient to see their father, the boys tugged at Catherine's hands. The door of Tom Dornan's room was partly open. Catherine pushed it the rest of the way and stood looking at her husband. When Tom saw them, his face brightened with that familiar smile. The boys ran to him and grasped his hand. Catherine watched her husband's eyes fill with tears when he looked at Brian. He's so pale, she thought. I can tell that he hurts. But he is going to get better. She did not need to force the radiant smile that formed on her lips as Michael lifted the chain with the St. Christopher medal from Brian's neck, and together they put it on Tom. Merry Christmas, Dad. Over his sons' heads, Tom looked at his wife and his lips formed the words, I love you. Other words sang through Catherine's being. All is calm. All is bright.